Hey, I'm Dan Kendall, the founder of Health Podcast Network, and I'm here to tell you if you enjoy podcasts that answer everyday questions about your health, you're going to love the show Your Doctor Friends, hosted by doctors Jeremy Allen and Julie Bruni. On Your Doctor Friends, they tackle the questions you've always wanted to ask, like, am I using sunscreen wrong? And how much protein do I really need to eat? Plus, they bring in their own network of their doctor friends, expert guests from around the world, so you get answers directly from trusted resources. Why spend hours Googling when you can let Julie and Jeremy be your doctor friends? You can listen and follow Your Doctor Friends on all your favorite podcast apps, and you can find those links at healthpodcastnetwork.com/friends. That's healthpodcastnetwork.com/friends.
Being able to say to them, hey, I just don't know. If nothing else, you can say, I just don't know. And that's a perfectly acceptable answer. And it kind of puts the ball back in their court to say, I don't know what's going on. What do you think? And then they can come and see the patient. Like you don't have to use intuition. And again, I don't think I've ever actually said the word intuition.
Where does nursing intuition come from? What's behind this phenomenon? And how can you start trusting your gut and make use of the power of your intuition in your nursing practice? Let's talk all about it with author, educator, and registered nurse Jennifer Johnson right here on episode 513 of The Nurse Keith Show. Well, hey there, this is Nurse Keith. If you happen to be listening when this episode first airs, you're tuning in during Nurses Week 2025. So, happy Nurses Week to you. And as always, this podcast is about you, your personal and professional development, your career, and the healthcare system writ large. And I'm here to share education, ideas, and informative interviews with some of the most inspiring people from the worlds of healthcare, nursing, medicine, entrepreneurship, and beyond. I love having you along for the ride, and I thank you from the bottom of my nurse podcaster's heart for being part of the growing Nurse Keith Nation. If you'd like to help other people find the show, please consider leaving a rating and review over on Apple Podcasts. That is so very helpful. And what else is helpful is if you'd like to join me on Patreon at patreon.com/Nurse Keith and throw me as little as $2 a month to help keep the lights on over here at the Nurse Keith Show. I appreciate my patrons so very, very much. You can also share the show with anyone who you think might enjoy it or get something out of it. And no matter how you're interacting with us, thank you so much for being here. Please head over to nursekeith.com to find the show notes for this episode. The show notes can also be found in any podcast app where you happen to be listening. And as I said today, we're here with Jennifer Johnson. She is an author, an educator, a registered nurse. And Jen, it's really great to have you here. You and I spoke several months ago, and we were super excited to plan to do this episode and have it come out during Nurses Week 2025. And I wanted to ask you this first question. When did you first realize that your intuition could actually have an impact on your practice? Where did it, that first awareness arise?
First and foremost, thank you so much for having me on. I'm kind of fangirling a little bit over here.
Oh, you're so sweet.
Nursing intuition. So I think it was probably within the first 5 years of my career. I was in a very, very small rural hospital where there wasn't a lot of action going on. So when we moved down to Niagara Falls area and, you're sitting at triage, all of a sudden triaging 80 to 100 to 120 patients in 12 hours, it started out as a game. It was just a way for me to try and keep on top of and engaged in triage for the full 12 hours because it never stopped. And so when people would first come in, I thought, oh, maybe I'll play a little bit. Let's see if I can guess as to what's going on or what they're coming in with. And somebody holding in their chest, well, it's chest pain. It's going to be pretty obvious. They're holding their abdomen. You're like, okay, abdomen pain. And it got to the point where it was so much fun that, you try and guess like, oh, before I even see them, what else, do I think they're really sick just from looking at them? Is their color okay? Are they sweating? Is their breathing off kind of thing? And it wasn't until they would get into the triage booth and we'd start talking And I'd get the sense that, oh, it's something way bigger is off. The story's unremarkable. Their vital signs are pretty good, but there's just something about them that I don't know what's going on, but I feel like you're sick. And it was just these moments that would happen, maybe once or twice a shift. And we had a lot of latitude in the emerge with medical directives and blood work and x-rays. And so we'd have pathways that we could do, chest pain, abdo pain, all these kind of things. But our physicians gave us some leeway. So every now and again, it would be like, well, I really want a CK, like a creatine kinase. I really want that. Or, I wonder what their lipase is going to be. I wonder what else is up? And it would get to the point of, you'd order the blood work at that point. You'd follow them kind of through their journey through the emerge. And when you would kind of go back at the end of shift and follow up with the nurse, be like, hey, what was up with that person? They're like, oh, on the CT, they had a retroperitoneal bleed after a really innocuous kind of injury with, running up, falling over their handlebars. A kid falling over their handlebars, like, oh yeah, no, that kid was really, really sick. And you're like, okay, holy cow, like that's huge. It just was so crazy that, you had that feeling and it was, you just followed through. And so it got to the point where I would just stop worrying about whether or not that was what was going on, or if I was right or not, or I just kind of started to play. And that was the origin of it all. You think that it's just, you try to logic it away. I'm just really good at my job. I've got some experience. I've got some certificates behind me that are above and beyond just your nursing degree. But it was just that weird sensation that kept catching me. And it was just something that, in fourth year, I think there was one professor who happened very casually to mention, oh, and by the way, trust your gut. And that was it. There was no lead up to that. There was no follow up afterwards. It was just that one statement.
Interesting.
And I didn't put any weight into it at the time, but she was so right. And I'm so glad that I was listening.
Yeah. You describe the game in your book, towards the beginning of your book, which is called Nursing Intuition, How to Trust Your Gut, Save Your Sanity, and Survive Your Nursing Career. And I was just reflecting in my mind when you mentioned your professor. I was remembering my associate degree program. And I had this one professor who was pretty cool. I liked her pretty much. Nursing professors always have their moments and flaws and their positives and negatives, right? But she was pretty cool. She'd been around the block a couple times. And she had a lot of funny stories to tell, but she also told stories about her gut, like when she just realized something was wrong and told the doctor, like, there's something wrong. We need to do X, Y, or Z, right? And sometimes the doctor would be like, okay. And sometimes the doctor would push back and be like, blah, blah, blah. They'd be very dismissive. But she described, I can't remember the actual stories, but I remember the feeling of hearing these stories and her talking about how she just knew, like, this patient was about to crash and there were no clinical signs that was about to happen, but she happened to know. So that stuck with me. And I think a lot of my colleagues took those stories in. And I think most of us have instances where we've seen that happen, where we just kind of know. And sometimes it's physical, like we know something physiological is about to go down. And sometimes it's more of an intuition about what's going on with someone on a psycho-spiritual level. Sometimes you intuit, does this person have trauma? Does this person have I don't know, is this person being abused? Like, you just kind of have a sense that something's up, right? Some people call it their Spidey Sense, right? So when you realized that it was a thing and you felt like it was something you could begin to trust, how would you describe, what does it feel like? Like, when you just know, is it in your body? Is it in your head? Is it something just in the ethers? Like, where do you grasp it?
So I feel like everybody's a little different. And sometimes the situation grabs you a little differently. So most times for me personally, it's just a heaviness in your gut that you just can't shake. You want to go on to see the next patient or do the next thing, but it's almost like your body's kind of holding you back to say, no, 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 you've got to deal with this now. Like you got to do something about this. And it's not until you finally notify the physician or talk to a colleague and have somebody else eyeball the patient for you to either confirm or deny that you know what you're talking about before that feeling kind of quells a little bit. A lot of times I've been at triage where questions will pop into my head and it's almost like they're coming out of my mouth before I even realize that I'm asking them. And those questions that come up out of nowhere have led to me very thankfully catching a lot of things that I wouldn't typically screen for. Talking to a young kid who's blackout drunk, and by the time he finally, comes around to it, you're kind of going like, why are you like this? Like, what's going on? And him telling you like, oh, this has been going on for 3 months. I've been worse than this before. And you're going, worse than this before? You were KO'd, kid. And it's not until all of a sudden you go like, well, how long has this been going on for? He says 3 months. And you're like, well, what happened 3 months ago? And it's out before I even realize. And he goes, well, I watched my dad fall down the stairs and die in front of me at the house. And the only way that I can sleep is to get blackout drunk. Otherwise, I'm waking up with nightmares. I'm like, oh, this just turned. This 100% just turned on its head. It's not just some 16-year-old kid looking to get drunk on a Saturday night. Now this is completely, more than likely PTSD and flashbacks. And this kid has figured out the only way that he can to cope in that moment. And, you ask him like, does family know? Oh, no, I don't want to bother. My mom's got enough on her plate. I don't want to bother anybody else. I don't want to be a burden. And you're like, well, we're gonna bring in your older brother and we're gonna talk about it and we're gonna get you the help that we can. And it's the only time in almost 17 years that I've ever given out my cell phone to that family to say, if you need anything, call me, text me, we will figure it out.
Wow.
And that was a one-off. I never asked, like, going down that route, like I never asked those kinds of questions. So what was with it at that point? What led to me just blurting that out and then not being able to take it back and being so thankful that I wasn't able to take it back.
Yeah. I mean, some people with a spiritual bent would have a certain idea or feeling about where that comes from.
Yeah.
Whether it's, an angel whispering in your ear, whatever it happens to be. Everybody has their own sense of where this stuff comes from. And in a way, I guess, it doesn't really matter where it comes from if you're willing to trust it. Like, does it affect how you make use of it if you don't know what it is, right? Mm-hmm. If it's that little voice, whether that voice is an angel, it's a spirit guide, it's just your gut, wherever you happen to come from, whatever your particular zeitgeist is that you live in, does it really matter in the end? I don't know. I mean, we're nurses, so some of us, have a more scientific bent. We want to figure things out. We want to know where stuff comes from. But, I was looking at several chapters of your book just before we hopped on our call, and you mentioned that in Merriam-Webster's dictionary, intuition is defined as, quote, the power or faculty of attaining direct knowledge or cognition without evident rational thought and inference, unquote, right? So if you're working in a medical situation, which most of us are, and you feel like something is going wrong or is about to go wrong, you say perhaps to the doctor or nurse practitioner, something's right? And they want data, and sometimes you just don't have it. You don't have any objective data to share. And I guess, does it sometimes depend on if you're with other colleagues, does it just depend on the tenor of your relationship with that doctor, for instance, whether that doctor is going to be like, okay, Jen, I hear you. Let's order that CKMB, right?
Yeah.
So does it just depend on the circumstance? And sometimes you're going to get dismissed and sometimes you're not. And you just have to go with how things roll out.
Yeah. Sometimes it's just a matter very much of knowing who you're working with. If you've
Mm-hmm.
worked with the same docs, the same colleagues for years on end, I can go up to them and be like, hey, Mrs. Smith in 6 is going to crash. I'm going to need you now. Please, let's go. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, not a problem. Whereas I've had the same reaction, yeah, or had said the same thing to either a new resident who isn't quite familiar with this kind of phenomenon, or somebody who doesn't know me, who hasn't worked with me, who doesn't kind of know my personal brand of crazy. And they go, oh, well, what, why? Like, oh, what are their
Mm-hmm.
vitals? Oh, they're kind of fine. They're whatever. And they do brush you off. And it's happened multiple times through the years. And it's just like, okay, well, just so you know, I'm just advocating for my patient. And usually that word catches them. As soon as you say advocacy, like, I'm just advocating for my patient, they go, oh, sometimes they'll backtrack, sometimes they'll double down on you're fine. But you can just chart, MD notified, no new orders received. Every single nurse reading a chart knows exactly what that means.
Yeah, I see. Okay, so if you're trying to use terms like you've said to me that are more palatable than intuition,
Yes.
like
Yeah.
intuition just will fall on deaf ears with certain people. And you have to kind of know who you're working with, like you said. Like some doctors are sort of right-brained and can receive that sort of thing. And then others are
Mhm.
very data-oriented. So you have to know your audience, right?
Very
But
much.
then you can document in a way that's more scientific and clear and clinical. And
Yeah.
you don't mention, your intuition in your notes because that's not going to fly.
No, no. But I mean, again, knowing who you're talking to. So in talking with physicians, the word Spidey Sense, 100% palatable.
Really
If absolutely, especially in the ER and critical
interesting.
care scenarios. I think it's Dr. Beach Gem on TikTok and Instagram. She's an ER physician with pediatrics, and she talks about the Spidey Sense constantly. So again, somebody else who's bringing this up, but that's how she knows it. That's her terminology. Have I ever said, "Oh, my intuition is ringing off, and I need you now"? I don't think I've ever once said that. Because again, if I say, well, I just don't know, and you kind of, if you lean on the docs and say like, hey, I need your expertise, that will get you places. That will,
Uh,
I'm leaning on you as an expertise, like an expert in your field. I'm leaning on you as a colleague. I'm leaning on you as the most responsible physician to come and reassess your patient, or come see the patient in the first place, if they're new to the emerge. But being able to say to them, hey, I just don't know. If nothing else, you can say, I just don't know. And that's a perfectly acceptable answer. And it kind of puts the ball back in their court to say, I don't know what's going on. What do you think? And then they can come and see the patient. Like you don't have to use intuition. And again, I don't think I've ever actually said the word intuition.
yeah, you know what it is,
Yeah.
right? But you're using language that's going to land correctly and get you the outcome that you want, which is them coming over, ordering something, or whatever it is you
Yeah.
want them to do, whatever you want to happen. You have a chapter in your book called Medical with a Sprinkle of Magical. Where did that chapter title come from? Like, how did you think of that?
It's one of those things where, you work the bedside long enough. We deal with life and death every single day. And you can't possibly be in this line of work without realizing that there's more to this than we know. The things that we deal with, the interactions that we have, the things that we see, it takes a lot to deal with. And even coming into nursing without much of a religious background, per se, you come in and you see a miracle. You see something that absolutely blows your mind, and you go, huh. I and yeah, you try to logic it away and try to make sense, but at a point you stop trying because nothing's making sense.
Mm-hmm.
And coming to terms to be at peace with that is so freeing, because you can kind of just, I'm going to take that for what it was, me being able to be there in that moment for that patient, for that interaction. It feels like I was meant to show up for that shift for that patient. So I'll take it, because
Mm-hmm.
I'm always looking for a win. In the ER, the wins are kind of few and far between. So I'm always looking for just that little bit of confirmation that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be at in that exact moment. So
Mm-hmm.
if
That's
something that
good.
comes up that's a little magical, a little unexplained, a little kooky, I'm 100% for it.
Yeah, I like that. That's great. And in your book, you ask lots of questions and lead people down certain pathways of, you know, kind of examining themselves and the way they think and how these things pop into their brain, their gut, whatever it is,
Yeah.
where does all this emerge from? And then what do you do to trust it and stoke it and kind of get it to work for you and with you? And you ask questions like, why don't you think this is going the right way? What makes you think something bad's going to happen? What do you think is behind your gut feeling? Where did you feel that feeling when it hit you? Things like that. And I think those are important things nursing students really should be guided into this,
Mm-hmm.
where I feel like I was to some extent by that particular professor. She opened the door to this idea, and I think she mentioned it multiple times, whereas you had a professor who just said it offhandedly and
One
never
off.
mentioned it again. So you had to kind of figure it out. So I feel like I
Yeah.
was lucky in a sense that I had someone who told us stories and said, you've got to trust when you know something's going to happen. She may even said, advocate for your patient because something's about to go down and
Yeah.
you want to come out ahead of it, not
Mm-hmm.
behind it. And, when we come back from the break, I want to talk about your course and your book and the journals that you have on your website and kind of where all this grows from and, where you feel like nurses can make the most of what you have to offer in terms of resources and kind of, what your vision is for people's careers and the profession and, how intuition can lead you down some really great roads if you trust yourself and trust what's happening around you. So does that sound good for the second half?
Sounds wonderful.
All right. Hang in there. We'll be right back with the second half of this episode of The Nurse Keith Show with Jennifer Johnson. Hey, everyone. Let's take a quick pause for the cause, shall we? Thanks for being a valued listener of The Nurse Keith Show. And if you'd like to help other people find the podcast, please consider leaving a rating and review over on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. This really helps propel the show and grow our audience. And I truly appreciate everyone who's already taken the time. And if leaving a public rating review isn't your thing, why not tell a colleague about the Nurse Keith Show by sending them a link so they can listen for themselves? After all, word of mouth is the most organic way for me to reach those who truly need to tune in. So if you'd like to do me a solid, please consider leaving a rating review or telling a friend or colleague. And by doing so, you'll be helping the Nurse Keith Show reach more and more nurses and healthcare professionals all around the world. Now, let's get back to today's conversation. And welcome back to the second half of this episode. We're here again with friend of the pod and my new friend and colleague, Jen Johnson. And Jen, we've been talking about intuition, where it comes from, how you can make use of it, how you can learn to trust it, whether or not we were led by our professors or people who precepted us to actually know that it's a thing, because many people probably don't even know it's a thing. And maybe they dismiss their Spidey sense over and over and over again, because there's sometimes nothing logical to say about it. You just know something bad is going on, or this person has some trauma that's not being verbalized. So we've been talking about all of that, but I just want to ask you first about, when you first entered the world of nursing, did you go right into the ER, or did you do other types of nursing first? Like, how did it all begin for you?
So I ended up in a very rural hospital. So in that setting, so it was less than 5,000 people. So there was one RN for the emerge, one RN for the floor with two RPNs or LVNs. And the floor really was just people waiting for long-term care placement or ALC beds kind of thing. Like they really weren't anybody acutely ill usually. So when I got orientated, it really was, okay, well, usually one day shift, you'll start in emerge, and then the second shift, you'll be on the floor and you just rotate. And so I never once thought about emergency nursing. It never was on my radar. Hadn't even seen the show ER before that point. So it was just happenstance. And for as traumatic as that the 5 years in that hospital was, it was my introduction to the emerge, and I've continued on with emerge since. So silver lining, it gave me a lot of time to get a lot of certificates and to look further into emergency nursing.
All right. And that was in a very, very small town in Ontario. Is that where you were? Yeah.
Northwest Ontario. Yeah.
Northwest Ontario. Yeah. And now you live down near Niagara Falls. Is that right?
Yeah. So I'm in Hamilton, which is about an hour outside of Toronto, an hour outside of the Falls, kind of in the crux of everything.
Yeah. And, in your work in terms of as a writer and as a kind of a nurse entrepreneur, you developed this book, Nursing Intuition: How to Trust Your Gut, Save Your Sanity, and Survive Your Career. And you've also developed some other things too, which I think are interesting and I wanted to bring up. So first, let's talk about the book. Did that grow out of a desire to communicate this whole notion of intuition and also resilience and trauma and how to protect yourself in your practice? Was that because you felt like you just had something you just needed to say, and you felt like writing a book was just a natural progression of you trying to communicate that to your fellow nurses?
Honestly, the book was never on my radar ever. It happened that with COVID, when everything shut down, we actually had attorneys come forward up in Ontario to say like, hey, we'll do all the first line responders, their wills for free. And so in a time where it was already super uncertain as to what was going to go on, it really solidified the fact that it felt like we weren't expected to survive. And so working for the next couple of months with that kind of hanging over our heads and seeing everything that had happened and everything just extending, it got to the point where I was completely burnt out, completely sleep deprived. I had a 4 and 5-year-old at the time, and with no access to daycare, I was working straight nights, up all day, up all night for days at a time. And so it got to the point of, I got to write these stories down for the kids, because if I was to pass, how do you explain to a 4 and 5-year-old that mom chose to continue to go into work at this time in 2020? So started to write down my good stories, which there were a couple there, but without realizing what I was doing, the traumatic stories all came pouring out, and they were out of me before I even could stop them. And so I'm looking at them, I'm like, okay, well, that's interesting. I'm not quite sure what to do with all these stories because I don't want my kids to know at least half of them. And I was listening to a online book fair by Llewellyn, who's a metaphysical publisher out of the States. And the one that I actually caught was Intuition at Work was the name of the book. And the author was talking about her work. And I thought, intuition at work? I'm like, I use my intuition all the time at work. And it was just such this light bulb moment to go, holy crap, that's it. That's everything. So I went back through all my stories that I'd written down, and everything had this little thread of intuition sewn through it. And it was just like, okay, so that's where that was supposed to go. So ended up doing a lot of writing on the intuition portion. And at this time, it's like maybe August of 2020. And the misinformation and disinformation was really starting to ramp up. And I'm going, I think if I put out this book as it is, with this notion of nursing intuition without any science behind it, I'm going to have my behind handed to me.
Mm.
And I think I'd actually be risking my license potentially if I put this out there without science behind it. So it led me going into this deep dive of psychology and metaphysics and physiology and nursing theory and all these different practices, and going, there's so much information, not just on intuition in general, but so much information on nursing and intuition specifically. And I'm going, holy crap, like this is it. This is 100% the mother lode. In nursing school, they tell you if it's evidence-based and science-backed, despite how you may feel about it, we need to be teaching it. And I'm going, okay, well, there's the science. The science is fresh and new and within 5 years and peer-reviewed and evidence-based and all the good things. And I'm going, okay, well, this is what I'm supposed to do. This is what I'm supposed to start talking about, because, at 3 a.m., we can talk about this and people will actually talk about it openly. But otherwise, we're not really talking about it because it's a little woo-woo, a little out there, and people don't think it's backed by science, but it actually is. So let's start talking. And truly, that was it. That was just,
Wow.
something was saying that this needs to happen, and apparently I was too exhausted to fight it anymore.
Wow. Interesting. So it was truly born out of, I mean, you could say trauma, because
Oh yeah.
it was 2020, et cetera, et cetera. We don't need to go into all the details because everybody remembers. You were on the front lines. I was not. So, you were right there. And that was just like, there you were, right? So that's a very moving, interesting, and kind of deep story about where this came from. And so the book came out, but you've also developed these journals for nurses, planners, journals, etc. So there's a whole bunch of them up on your website, and I think they're on. Are they on Etsy? I'm not sure where they live, but I know some of them, or actually all of them, live on your website as well.
Yeah.
So where do people find them, and what are they, and how can people make use of them?
Yeah. So everything's on Amazon.
On Amazon. Okay.
Everything's on Amazon. It's obviously available through me as well as Etsy a little bit as well. But yeah, the planner. So in writing the book and finally talking about it, landed me being able to speak at a local university here to first year nursing students, and like September first year, like they're barely 2 minutes in, and talking about nursing intuition and talking about my stories and kind of giving them a firsthand perspective of this is what you're walking into. And all of their questions were about how do I prevent burnout? How do I manage work-life balance? How do I grieve a patient? How do I emotionally be available, but yet be protective of myself as well? And I was standing there and I'm going, guys, I don't think I've ever asked myself these questions, let alone you guys are like minute 1 of nursing school and are already, this is the top of your priorities list. So I'm like, okay, clearly there's a need. It was 2 different classes. They both came up with the exact same questions. I'm like, all right, so this is what this generation wants. This is what this generation needs. And so I'm like, okay, let me put it together. So the 100 Shifts Journal, it's a summary. So in the very front part, there's some education about resilience and trigger identification and kind of getting your emotional intelligence about yourself up a little bit. And then the other portion is skills checklists, so the skills checklist through the book will change as the book goes on. And then there's shift summaries. So here's your shift, your 12 hours, what went well, what didn't go so well, was there a theme to the day? Usually in Emerge, there's a theme to the day. Is it abdo pain day? Is it chest pain day? Is it lack day? And then some things about you, how many steps did you get in? How much water did you get? Did you get any sleep beforehand? Were you fully staffed? Did you get any breaks? And again, just more data collection for you. And it gives you spots where you can identify, do you have any med questions or questions that came up during your shift about certain pathophysiologies that, we all know that the stretch between nursing education and frontline nursing is very vast and is absolute. The learning curve is straight up. And when you're going through it, you're just looking to survive the day and get through the shift and on to the next. And I remember even myself thinking like, oh, I had questions about this medication. I'll remember to look that up when I get home. No, you won't. You clock out, your brain shuts down. You're trying to mentally, rewind through the entire shift and what's gone on and mentally come to terms with probably the worst of humanity that you've seen today. And it's gone. You don't have those moments where you can kind of reflect and quickly write stuff down. And so this was my attempt at, write it down, keep track. A career in nursing isn't made up of big wins, truly, because it might be years, if ever, that you get a big win, but it is made up of little teeny tiny wins every single shift. Whether that win is being able to get an IV on the first go finally, or being able to advocate for a patient, or being able to comfort a family member after somebody dies. Those are little wins that we very quickly discount. And so, write it down, remember it, because when you have that shift that completely knocks you out, drags you out, and you have the feeling of, I'm not learning fast enough, I'm not growing, I don't know if this is right for me, you can go back into your own experiences and go, no, like I am learning, I am growing. I had questions about type 2 diabetes when I first started. Well, now I know a fair bit about type 2 diabetes. Now I'm learning more about type 1 or the SIDH or some other, complication. I am learning. I am getting there. And so it gives you that feeling that no, like I am getting there. It's just going to take time.
Yeah, that's great. So that's the 100 Shifts, a care planner for nurses.
That's the 100 shifts. Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's also a book you have here, or a journal called The Patients We Lost. And I'm assuming, based on the description, that it's a place where you can kind of journal some of the stuff that's going on for you around losses of patients, which most of us have suffered over the years, right?
Yeah. It gives you spots to chart. Oh my gosh, I keep saying chart, to journal.
Yeah. Not a chart.
Not a chart, you can journal about up to 5 patients. But there's also prompts through the book. Like you don't have to rely on yourself to come up with all these grandiose ideas about coping and death and mourning and grieving and healing. The journal has got lots of prompts for you. So you can just, you've had a rough day. You finally kind of have the emotional resilience to go back into it. And so it'll prompt you, what was it about that patient that seems to have hit so hard?
Sure.
All these kind of things where you can get it out, because the generations of us, those who've been in it for a while, it's, you shove it down, you don't talk about it, you go on with your day and you don't talk about it at home.
That's true.
And it's only within the last 5-10 years that we're like, no, we need to talk about it. We need a therapist or 2. we need to decompress and unpack everything that we're carrying, because, every nurse has got somebody that they're carrying with them that they only met one time.
So true. So true. Yeah. Gosh, I carry so many people with me who've died over the years. I worked in the HIV world for a long time.
Oh,
even
yeah.
before, when we had maybe 2 medications. I worked in that world. We had very little. We had AZT and DDI, and that was it. I went to
Yeah.
a lot of funerals. So yeah, it's kind of big. And not all of us work in worlds where we lose a lot of patients. Some people who work in like school nursing,
Yeah.
there might be a child who dies here and there, but some of us are in situations where we witness a lot of grief and a lot of loss and trauma. So it all depends where you end up.
Yeah.
And I just want to mention too, your intuition course. So is this like an asynchronous course? Is it video based? How does that work?
Yeah, kind of still figuring out some inner workings.
Mm-hmm.
But it's pretty much, let me help. Let me guide you through it. You've got questions. Obviously, you've gotten to this point of finding me and my work. So let me help guide you. If you can't find anybody at work who you can kind of bounce ideas off of and reflect on things and learn about different scenarios and what intuition feels like and how to deal with it and how to advocate for both yourself and your patients. If you're having a hard time finding that, I'm right here. I'm 100% right here for you. And it is mostly video and then obviously some journaling and learning and it goes alongside the book. But, it's getting to the point where, let's just talk about it and
Mm-hmm.
let's if there's any more ways I can support new nurses, I will try and find them because it's not that we have a nursing shortage. We have a shortage of nurses willing to put up with a bare minimum.
Yeah.
And so let's start supporting people before there even is the question of burnout. I mean, even coming out of nursing school, we're all kind of a little crispy at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So to then throw people to the absolute wolves is completely inhuman and horrific. And that's on a good day, let alone if you've got bullies or a toxic work environment or no access to support. So let's just try and support you as best I can for as long as I can. And I can't wait to watch you grow.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And your book, I mean, you do tell stories about bullies. I think there's
Oh
2
yeah.
bullying stories
Well,
and
there's I think 3.
3. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there's bullying stories. There's stuff about trauma,
Yeah.
resilience, all those different aspects that we need to pay attention to that, depending on the school you went to, you may or may not have had those addressed in a useful or robust way. You may have had a professor or preceptor or someone or a mentor who really did guide you through that stuff and really help you develop the wherewithal and just sort of that muscle that you need to develop to be able to deal with these things that we come up against during our practices, during the course of our careers. But some of us don't get that. So we have to develop it over time. So speaking of schools, just for a moment, I just want to
Mm-hmm.
ask you, I know schools have to teach to the exam, right? Because
Yeah.
they need their graduates to pass the
Pass.
NCLEX, et cetera. I totally get it. Right. But do you feel like most schools give short shrift to this stuff?
Yeah. So the overarching message always felt like you were going to save everybody. And so when
Oh,
it finally got to practice, you felt like you were completely unprepared that all of that death was your fault because the feeling was that you were going to save everybody. So if I'm not saving everybody, that must mean it's me, right? Like it's my
ouch.
practice,
Ooh,
So how
yeah.
do we need more talk about, death, dying with dignity, palliative care. And the physicians say the same thing, where they don't have a lot of discussions about palliative care or that kind of avenue. There are a lot of things that I wish they would have hit on, how to advocate for your patients, how to stand up for yourself, how to deal with toxic workplaces, how to put yourself first. I wish that would have been the overarching message. I really
Yeah.
do.
And unfortunately, that stuff's not on the licensing exam. So it does not get addressed very often or deeply unless you happen to have somebody on that faculty that who you come across who just, that's one of the things that's their rallying cry. So if you've had that, in the course of your career, your education, you're super lucky. Count yourself among the lucky ones. And otherwise, you need to figure it out in other ways. And luckily, there's people like you, people like so many people who've been on my podcast who, are offering those kinds of services and those sorts of resources for nursing students and nurses to develop their intuition, develop their self-care, their resilience, all the things that we need in order to survive and thrive in our careers, right? So there's so much more we could talk about. Gosh, I feel like we just vaporized this entire 45 or 50 minutes, but I do have 4 quick questions that I ask all my guests at the end of episodes. And they're a little oblique because they're not directly related to what we've been talking about, but are you cool with a little lightning round?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So I know you're a deep thinker. You think a lot about human nature and, there's just so much that I can tell from your book and from our conversations. So this is going to be easy for you. So of everything there is to understand, what's something about human nature or about human life that you'd really like to understand?
Why people's go-to response when they're in pain or stressed out or anxious, when they seem to come to the emerge, is anger.
Huh.
I would love to know why that seems to be the default.
Interesting. Yeah. Is it trauma? Is it, what is it? So in emergency, you've seen a lot of anger, anger's very common.
So the one statistic is, as an ER nurse, I am 10 times more likely to be assaulted than police and corrections combined.
Imagine that. Wow.
Imagine that. Where was that statistic in nursing school?
Yeah, no kidding, man. They didn't tell you because you would have run for the exit and been like, I'm going to become a police officer. Yeah.
No, too much kudos to those guys. Couldn't do it.
Couldn't do that either. Yeah. No, I hear you. That's a good one. I like that. So, you've known a lot of people in your life, but who's one person who's one of your go-to? You could call them a hero, someone you look up to. They could be living or dead. They could be a really famous person, or it could be someone from your personal life who just holds a lot of meaning for you.
Tilda Shaloff.
Tell me who that is.
Tilda Shaloff is an ICU nurse out of Toronto. Mm-hmm. She has written several books on nursing and her experiences, both as a provider and as a patient. Her debut book, The Making of a Nurse, thankfully has started to get into a lot of, especially Canadian universities as mandatory reading. And it was just one book that, when I was in my darkest time, thinking about, I wasn't learning fast enough. I didn't understand what was going on. I wasn't sure if I was going to be a nurse or a good nurse. And I was reading her book, and there was a passage where she had listed off a bunch of skills. And I'm like, okay, I can do that. I can do that. I can do that. I can do that. Okay, I'm all right. I'm fine. So it was one of those books that really was right there when I absolutely needed it. And I've been so lucky to have become a friend of hers, and we've talked, and she's read the book and she loves it. And it, you want to talk about fangirling. I just about fell on the floor when she got back to me and wanted to read the book.
Oh,
so
that's wonderful.
It's I'm hoping that maybe that I will be that for somebody else, to get them through that moment and to have that book as a resource.
I have no doubt. Tilda Shaloff, thank you for that. Shaloff?
One F, I believe.
One F. Okay.
Yeah.
Tilda Shaloff. Awesome. Okay. Speaking of books and films, aside from Tilda's, what's a book or film that has really impacted you in a significant way? Perhaps one that you go back to repeatedly.
Movie-wise, that's a good one. It's hard because there's so many good books, and and truly, like, let's take a look. What have I got under here? Yeah, anything by Brene Brown
Oh,
is
yes, of course.
so good. Oh my God. Sarah Di Gregorio is also fantastic. Another nurse. Yeah. Oh, The Wisdom of Nurses by Amy Archibald Varley and Sarah Fung. They're actually local with me, so I get to see them fairly often. So also another phenomenal book, really bringing to light the strength of nurses and what it's actually like to nurse.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Okay. Last question. If you were named Queen of the World tomorrow and you had optimal, ultimate power to do everything that you wanted to do, what's the first thing you'd want to do right out of the gate to improve the lives of your subjects? And you could do anything.
Free healthcare.
You're not the first to say that. And tell me why. Why is free healthcare? Why would that be the first action?
So just as a Canadian, it is our go-to number one thing that we are the most thankful for.
Yeah.
It is not a perfect system, but the more I hear about Americans who have to get GoFundMe's to pay for for life-saving measures, or ICU stays, or to have a baby is, I think, $40,000 or $50,000. It blows my mind, and so I can't imagine the level of constant low-level stress that an American must live with once they have a chronic medical condition.
Absolutely.
I can't imagine that. It breaks my heart, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, we could talk about that for hours. So yeah, I appreciate that a lot. I know the NHS in England isn't perfect and the Canadian system's not perfect, et cetera. But yeah, that's a whole nother conversation, but I appreciate that a lot.
No
so
worries.
I want people to go to your website, rxforgrowth.com. They can find your book, Nursing Intuition, How to Trust Your Gut, Save Your Sanity, and Survive Your Career. They can find you on Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn. All those links are in the show notes in the app where people are listening or on my website. And I want them to just go check out Prescription for Growth. Also, if they know new nurses or nursing grads and want to get them a gift, there's a bundle of several of your journals that make a really good gift for a new nurse graduate. So I want people to head over to RX for Growth and check it out. So Jen Johnson, I'm so glad you reached out to me. I'm so glad we've met and become friends and colleagues. And thanks for hanging out here. And thanks for creating a book and all these journals and the course and some really special resources for new and seasoned nurses that I think this is a little gold mine that people need to know about. So thanks for hanging out here.
Anytime. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, there you have it. Thanks for listening to this special Nurses Week 2025 episode of the Nurse Keith Show with Jen Johnson. Remember, the show notes can be found at nursekeith.com and also on the app where you find yourself listening. Please click on the links, visit Jen, check her out on LinkedIn and Instagram. Let her know you listened. Let her know where you heard her. I hope you feel uplifted and empowered from this episode. If you need personalized holistic career coaching to elevate your nursing career, check out nursekeith.com and Nurse Keith Coaching. Mention the podcast and get 10% off your first coaching package. And become a patron at patreon.com/Nurse Keith. I so appreciate the people who are throwing like $2 a month over here to help the show and help us keep going. Really appreciate it. We are proud members of the Health Podcast Network at healthpodcastnetwork.com, and we are adroitly produced by Rob Johnston of 520R Podcasting. Awesome. Shouts out to Rob for his great work on the Nurse Keith Show. Before we say goodbye, I'll leave you with this quote by Brene Brown. Because true belonging only happens when we present our authentic, imperfect selves to the world. Our sense of belonging can never be greater than our level of self-acceptance. Be well, dig deep, seek joy, keep in touch. This is Nurse Keith saying adios till next time from beautiful and super windy Santa Fe, New Mexico. And the wonderful Jen Johnson saying arrivederci from
Hamilton, Ontario.
All right. Thank you, Jen. Thanks to everyone for being here. And we will catch you, of course, on the proverbial flip side.